Awesome. Okay, well, I think we'll get rolling. Again, this is going to be about an hour long. Won't go longer than that. It is being recorded. Really grateful for you jumping on here. And it's going to be available for those on my Patreon subscriber platform later. So again, video is going to stay off except for Julia and me, and chat will stay on. If you've got a question, shoot that to her directly. And so why live Q&A? What is going to happen? And that's a big shrug emoji. I don't know what is going to happen, but we're going to find out really soon. But in answer to the why question, I was thinking of a few reasons. And one is that it's a chance to engage directly and share more personally with those who have chosen to join my circle of patronage, and really grateful for all of you. And also, this is a new endeavor. This is, if it's not already really evident, this is the first time doing a live Q&A. And so it's a learning opportunity, I think, certainly for me, but hopefully for all of us. And I am also hoping to gather a sense of what will serve you as you're supporting me and what's of value to you. So if this conversation is received in that way, love to hear some feedback about that. And but otherwise, I think we're good to go. So as I've been saying in my social media posts and email newsletters leading up to this point, this is Julia Kochuk. Julia is a dear friend. She and her husband, Devin, have been part of Artisan Church for several years. And as our friendship grew, also realized the many things that Julia is good at. And one of them is writing and editing. And so as my book one journey kind of began, we entered into conversation about this and explored this possibility, and she agreed to be my editor. And it's hard. There's so much I could say about how much I value Julia's work and her friendship and the way that she helped my writing elevate to the level that it is in book one. I'm hoping we can work together again on book two. It'll all depend on timing and if I can get my stuff together and if it works with Julia's med school journey, which is why she's in Ireland. And so for this first one, super honored that she was available and we were able to find a time for her to be here for this. And I think we will get rolling. So welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nelson, for that lovely introduction. I am seeing questions come in from a bunch of you already, so I'll hold on to those and we'll ask them a little bit later on in tonight's conversation. Or I guess it's not tonight for you all; it's morning over there. Yeah, we'll get to those in a little bit. So, Nelson, I don't know a lot of what's going on in your life right now. Not seeing you day to day. Just curious what your life is looking like these days.
Yeah.
How are things going over there?
Yeah, it's an interesting season. We are in this liminal space of my role at Artisan Church being diminished or reduced somewhat. And so I am now I'm in a season now where I'm not paid full-time anymore, but 75%. I have a sabbatical coming up in May, and that'll be for 3 months. Say more about that a little bit later. But then once I return from sabbatical in August, my role will be reduced another quarter to 50%. And so I've known about this since last June officially, but I've been sitting with these questions for several years, and you know that as well about, well, am I meant to continue full-time as a pastor, or I have these other pursuits that I really am interested in, and music is one of those, keeps pulling me, sort of nudging me out. And if I get a chance to do it within the role, that's great. But I also celebrate chance to play at Christmas presents or do a jazz gig or something like that. Writing is another huge one, of course. And so with writing book one, and as a bit of a test to see, do I actually want to do this more? And the answer came back, yes, I really love this process of long form writing. So now the question then has been, what do I still need to earn a fair bit for our household in this season. And so trying to figure out how do I make up that difference, and doing that discerning work and saying, you know what, I think through writing, through offering spiritual direction as two primary ways of generating some income, those are, I think, what I want to pour myself into. So in many ways, I felt like I'm in kind of small business startup mode, and treating these side hustles not as just optional, but as actually integral. And I need to figure out ways to generate some income from that. So hence the Patreon and taking on some more directees and making plans for book 2. So I'm in this in between, very much looking forward to sabbatical when I can really get into a writing practice again. And but in the moment, I'm also trying to sharpen what my role is going to look like at Artisan moving forward, especially moving down to 50%. That's a big change from full, of course, and the team's growing and changing, and we've got interns and more kids and youth group and all kinds of things. So the needs of the church are changing and shifting, and yet I'm not done. So what does my 50% look like moving forward? So there's a lot of my key word for 2024 was figuring it out. It's one word. Don't look it up, but
Figuring
it's
it out.
one word. Just trust me.
Yeah. You say it fast enough. And
yeah, exactly. And it's figuring it out with Jesus was the sense as well. Like I need help with this. So it's just really relying on a sense of the Spirit of Christ with me and in me to let's figure this out. Let's do it together. Yeah.
I find it interesting that you referred to like a few of those writing and music and things as side hustles. So if you're calling them side hustles, but I would also call you a writer, and I've heard you call yourself a writer. So when did that kind of change from writing being a hobby or being a side hustle to now Nelson is a writer?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's been an interesting journey, and it's interesting how like the emotion even starts to surface around it, and how much is in that sense of owning that identity and growing to that space. But really close friends and humans have been pretty catalytic for me. So Lance Odegaard, who I served at Artisan with for a good many years since we started the church, and he was one of the first ones that really called out my identity as a writer, my gift as a writer. He at one point said, "Nelson, you're a really good writer," and then I kind of started to believe him. Another observation that he made was that I actually found my way into teaching and preaching through writing, because I'm a manuscript writer, so I write everything out. And so he just sort of flipped that on its head a bit and says, you were actually a writer before you were a preacher and a teacher. So it's just a different way of framing that. And it helped me to sort of like, there's some truth to that. And so to say, like, I've been writing for over 2 decades. And I mean, if you go back to high school and college and all that stuff, even more. And then you were instrumental too, as we got into this writing journey, especially at the beginning, to help me really own that, and just says, you're a writer, Nelson, you're doing it. If you're writing, you're a writer. And so, yeah, it's been interesting to sort of take that journey, but to gain some confidence from people that I really trust and respect and value. So yeah, so been owning it, and it's on my Instagram handle now. It's like writer. So yeah.
Once it's on there, it's real.
It's official. Yeah.
No, I feel like you've done the same for me and for lots of other people. Just like noticing something and naming it has big power. And so then what made you decide to write that first book?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to think about how far to go back there, but I think maybe the earliest seeds that I could identify of the thought of writing a book were about 1.5 years before my first sabbatical. So this is 2016-ish or early 17, and where I was doing some journaling, some reflecting, and I just learned that I would have a sabbatical. We put HR policies in place, and it said, and Lance told me, I want you to go first. It's like, so, okay, so 2018, this is 1.5 years away. What might I do? So I Googled how to think well about sabbatical or something like that. Found some resources, probably a Eugene Peterson piece or something like that. And few things kind of did a lectio. I mean, like there was some article that was like 12 best practices, something to that effect. And I noticed a shift in geography, do something with another part of your brain. if you need to study, take a course, those sorts of things. I'm like, well, no, I don't need to do that kind of learning, at least at this point in time. Or if there's a practice that you want to develop that feels rejuvenating, restful, refreshing. And so the idea of writing something long form like a book had started to surface on some level as well. So I began to think about, well, what might that book be? And my passion for wine emerged. I thought about a connection that we had to a place in the Okanagan, and began to just dream about that possibility. What if I could work in a winery for a while, do some hands-on learning, and actually then turn that into a book that would trace wine's transformation as well as the human spiritual kind of transformation that goes alongside that. So once the idea was there, it was like, oh my goodness, this is too good. I can't let this go. This seems to be something of the spirit in this. And so I just began to pursue it, started to make those call outs and just to see whether this could be possible. And that took some doing, but finally made it. And so, yeah. And somehow it got done. And somehow amidst all the changes of the last, 5-6 years, got a book in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. We were just talking about how quickly it seemed to have happened, actually writing that book, and amazed that you did it. Did that book, you said that you had an idea, did that idea change over time through when you were writing the book, or did you kind of stick to the original idea? Or I guess another way of putting it is, were you writing like a plotter or like a pantser, which we can say a fly by the seat of your pantser to
Right.
clarify meaning.
Yes.
There. Not this.
Not that.
Which I don't know if you were doing on your sabbatical or whatever,
Right.
too. I mean, who knows?
Having fun. Yeah. Good question. I definitely veer towards the plotter side to map it out. And for me, once the idea of really following the transformational journey, it's mapped out. It's from dirt to glass, and to trace that out. I remember actually sketching 4 or 5 sections or something, like, so one was like dirt, vineyard, and then moving into the cellar, moving into the bottle and tasting room. And so having those sections, that was pretty early on, and that actually that exists in the book. There was a moment at which I had to sharpen and say, well, what are these, whatever, 10 or 11 chapters? Someone else is showing up. Laura's here.
Lauren.
Hi. And so, but there was one point at which it dawned on me that I needed to address what I called the shadow side. So here I was, particularly as a person of faith, as a person who works in a church, kind of celebrating an alcoholic beverage and calling attention to it. And so I could just be passive aggressive and say, well, Jesus did it, it's okay for me, without acknowledging, the dangers of misuse or overuse or those sorts of things too. So that was one that kind of got inserted. And it's like, well, what section am I going to put that in? Which professionals am I going to reach out to do the research around that, which you encouraged me as well in the editing process. And so that was one insertion, which wasn't a chapter that I originally envisioned, but all those chapters as well, once I kind of had them, I more or less stuck with that general progression. Yeah.
So the plotter.
Yeah. And one other idea too, I didn't know how it was going to end. And so I didn't know what the ending exactly was going to be. So I wanted some sort of epilogue feel, like, when you come to a book and you go, it's like, this is done, and so, so the idea of returning to somewhereness as that image of one's own identity as it relates to place, and to turn that outward at the end of the book. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read it yet, that's what we do at the end, but I won't say more.
You got to go read it.
Got to go read it. Yeah.
I am curious how your jazz improviness and being like creating in that space fits or goes against or feels different from your practice as a writer if you're plotting in one way. Like, do you find any moments of improv? Or I'm curious how that question lands.
That's really great. Yeah, man. I see so many parallels because one of the, and especially even around the plotting. So it might seem like it's paradoxical, but jazz is actually a lot more structured and plotted out than one might think, at least in terms of the song form. So at least in traditional ways of playing jazz, you have a tune, it's a recognizable melody, it's written down somewhere, and we're all playing off that same chart. But once you play that melody through, then you go back through those same chords and progression and you improvise. So then you start to do variations on that theme. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of carryover there too in terms of structure actually frees. And so at least that's what I've tried to sort of live into. And I see parallels there with the liturgical year or the church calendar. You have these seasons, you have these things that you're drawn toward, colors, themes, parts of scripture, but the freedom to really engage those things, there's so much possibility in the midst of that. So I think there's a lot there. Yeah, and then there are moments where this gets a little bit into kind of the editing questions, but feels relevant in this moment to sort of mention that I'm not a great Julia Cameron morning pages person.
Mm.
So I don't have a daily practice of writing where I'm just writing for the sake of getting my muscle memory kind of going. Um, because of the rest of my life as a dad, as a pastor, in all the other sort of spheres, I've had to be careful about like carving out, this is my writing time. And while I was a full-time pastor, it was like kind of one morning a week and occasional writing retreats that I was able to carve out. And that's how book one kind of got done, was like steady Friday mornings. And but in those moments, I would set a word count goal. And
Mm-hmm.
usually it was about 1,000 words, let's say in a 3-hour session. And I would do my best to force myself, because usually I default to editing on the fly. And I attribute that to, again, probably a couple of decades of writing either a lecture or a sermon that's due in 4 days or in 2 days, or, so I don't have time to do all kinds of iterations or drafts. At least that's what I kept telling myself. And so I got to make this good now, otherwise it won't get good. So,
Yep.
so there is a lot of that process, but I absolutely see the value of just writing for the sake of writing. And so that's the improvisation sometimes.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I maybe book number 3,
Mhm.
jazz, structure, freedom and structure. I don't know. Just
Well, just make a note here. Yeah.
um, but hey, you mentioned Julia Cameron, and Steve actually sent in a question
Okay.
about Julia Cameron. So
Hmm.
let's do a little Julia Cameron tangent. Steve asks, people like Julia Cameron talk about inner critics, and she
Hmm.
has even named hers. How much do you think about your inner critic? Have you named yours?
Hmm.
And are there any thoughts about those negative voices and how we can deal with them appropriately?
Wow,
Whew.
that's really good. Real softball there, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I my inner critic is not super vocal in the writing process for me. Um, where I haven't named, and I don't know what gender my inner critic is. I haven't gendered it, haven't named it. So they, that my inner critic has tended to show up now in this entrepreneurial space or in
Mm,
the marketing of the book. And
yeah.
it's not even super harsh. It's just the voice that is saying, I did a post about this a week or so ago, just to encourage other artists to keep stepping into. But one of the lies that I'm prone to believe is that every other artist is doing this solo with no help, or no one actually wants to help you, or you don't have enough followers to think you can, kind of show up in this space with any kind of legitimacy. And so those sorts of things are lies that are, and again, they're not super hypercritical. And maybe the work that I think I've done through spiritual direction, receiving spiritual direction in the last 20 or so years, has helped ease off the potential damaging, hurt, or harmful kind of effects of an inner critic. So maybe I've learned some practices to keep that at bay. And I mean, one of them is centering prayer. So the habit of centering prayers, which is simply a constant returning to, for me, belovedness, that sense of worth and value and belovedness, and in the silence to keep returning to that, and whatever sensations, thoughts, or feelings tend to surface, to keep returning and saying, no, no, this is my primary kind of space. So did I cover something of each part of the question? I'm not sure if I missed anything.
Well, yeah, you
You
talked
know,
about how you think about your critic. You have to just come up with a name before the end of the hour, and
yeah,
then we'll
yeah,
be okay.
yeah,
Yeah, Steve did ask any thoughts about how to deal with them appropriately, which I feel like the centering prayer
right.
is a really
Yeah,
good practice to try.
totally. And I think also even affirmations, like, to stay on the Julia Cameron note, like
Hmm.
she talks
Hmm.
about your allies, like she talks about the enemies and the allies to those inner voices and stuff. But the practice of affirmations, it can be really, really powerful. I did an artist retreat just 2 weeks ago, and we looked at those pieces, and even to hear people say them out loud and to receive them and say, like, yeah, you are a creative human being, or that sort of stuff, like to say that out
Yeah.
loud, or to say I am,
Yep.
or
You
I'm a
are a
writer.
writer.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's huge,
Yeah.
to own that.
Mm.
Um, I want to go back a little bit to understand more about what Nelson's writing process looks like. What does your desk, your space look like? Where are you writing when
Right.
you are writing?
Yeah. Um, Three main spaces, I suppose. One is the third spaces outside of the home or the workplace. I guess I can include the office too, so maybe four. But home, office, coffee shops, and then at home, specifically on the patio in the backyard. And
Hmm.
so coffee shop spaces work okay for me. And actually, the first year or so, that was a fairly primary one. It was an early morning, and and those mornings I would try as much as possible, writing days, to go for a run first. So to get the
Hmm.
blood flowing as well, I found was always super helpful. So to get up quite early to do that run, and then sometimes to be in the chair by 7:30, or even 8 o'clock. And because knowing that my morning hours are when I'm the freshest, this is where I'm going to have the highest possibility of ROI on my time.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
getting the blood flowing, getting into that space. And if the music in the coffee shop is non-offensive, there was a time when we were still living in Yaletown, and at Matchstick, they had a great playlist, and sometimes there was even lyrics. If I've got headphones on, which I do in some of the other spaces, it's instrumental. I can't really
Hmm.
focus if there are words to it. And I have a playlist. If you haven't seen it, I've got an NJB Writes
Yep.
playlist, and so we could pop that in the chat if people want to see. And something these days with a bit of a beat to it, bit some soul to it, and so that's what I need. But anyway, if the coffee shop music is not turning me off, and I'll know that pretty quickly, then I'm happy to go without headphones.
Okay.
And then I set my word count goal, and there's enough ambient noise that seems to kind of drown that out, and we'll just go. So ideally, I've got a plan. I want to work on this chapter, this section, this little story that I want to tell in the midst of it, and kind of go from there. Sometimes the writing days are organizing, and so I'm
Hmm.
actually trying to map out and say, what am I going to work on for this week and next week, and just getting organized. I'm veering off from spaces. So my home space is not much different. The patio was just so nice. For many years living in Yaletown, we did not have outdoor space that was our own.
Hmm.
So moving to Mount Pleasant in 2019, and we had our own little patio. So I really, really love that space. And similarly, it's in the morning, so I've got a coffee. There are plants around me, our garden. There's greenness, and yeah, quiet. So yeah.
How do you mentioned quiet,
Mm.
having a young child, how do you kind of um, incorporate some of Adri's noise into your writing process, or make sure you protect time while still being a great dad?
Yeah, right. Well, a lot of these, again, if Adri's in the house, it's not a writing moment unless
Not
she's
gonna happen.
sleeping. Yeah, so evenings are not prime time for me, but
Mhm.
it's been interesting to notice now in the entrepreneurial kind of space where I'm trying to post 3 times a week. I have to use my evenings to get it ready for the next
Mhm.
morning. And so, and those things, I can generate something some
Yeah.
evenings, and that sometimes I just need a break. And man, if I tried to do that daily, I don't have that capacity. But yeah, usually these are times when Adri's in school, and
Okay.
so I know that I can be free and clear of and then focused when she is around and I'm at home. So yeah.
Oh, thanks. Makes sense.
Mhm.
We do have another music question coming in
Oh,
hot from Devin
nice.
Landis.
Debbie.
Um, oh, I thought it was a question about your writing playlist, but it's actually a question about your car playlists. And what I
Mm.
think Devin is referring
Songs for
to
the
is
car.
songs for the car.
Yeah,
So Nelson's a very good playlist maker. If you will get all the Patreons your writing playlist,
right.
but then you also must send out your songs for the car um, playlist as well. He, as a Patreon, he would like to have those. Is
Nice.
what he's saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, okay, so I would like to let me. I know that Lando asked a question early on,
Hmm.
which I might hold a little longer, Lando. So thanks for your patience there, because it relates to um, kind of some looking ahead
Mm.
to book
Hmm.
number two. So
Hmm.
we did have some questions sent in from other Patreons who couldn't be here right now. So this question is from Abigail, and Abigail asks, she'd love to hear more about your editing process, especially any difficult editing decisions. She's wondering, do you tend to edit as you write? Or do you get it all down and edit later?
Right. Yeah, so to answer, I talked a bit about the second part of that question already, but I tend to veer towards editing as I on the fly. And usually that's just kind of that's what's in my body because of short form writing. But trying to grow into the latter, where I trust myself to do what Anne Lamott calls the shitty first draft and to
Hmm.
really just get that down um, and trust the editing process. So I feel I have more lived experience in trusting the later editing process because I've now lived through it once with you.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what book two yields around that and whether I can grow more into it. On the other hand, I'm trying to shut down the inner critic that might say, if you're editing on the fly, you're doing it wrong. Because I don't believe that. I got
Hmm.
it done by mostly editing on the fly and then
Yep.
having an editing process that was more rigorous and on it and stuff too. So yeah, the voices that would say there's one way, no time for
Get him
that.
out of here.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
and it was so nice, so nice to get writing that was like well thought out, already structured, mostly grammatically correct. I think like
Right.
you had a better handle on that than I did sometimes. Um, so
Yeah. Yeah,
as an editor, I
totally.
didn't mind. I didn't mind that.
I appreciate that. And as regards like any difficult editing decisions, those some of them I didn't know they would be difficult editing decisions until the editing process. And so we just wrestled those out. And I feel like there were moments where you were always so good and gracious in balancing cheerleading encouragement, reminding me I'm the boss, that I can take or leave any editing constructive, criticisms that you would throw at me because this is my book ultimately. And so owning that, but at the same time, me also extending trust and saying, looking at something and saying, okay, chapter 7 called pairings comes to mind as one example where I was trying to bring together different kinds of pairings other than food and wine. And again, explore them metaphorically. And that was one that you put your finger on and said, this is not quite hanging together as I would like it to for the reading experience. And maybe there still could have been more work to do in order to make that happen. But I really loved each component of that. So I wanted to try to find a way to work through that. So that in that case, the process was some back and forths saying, okay, how is this sitting now? Is this hanging together better? I'll throw this out too. One of your most helpful takeaways from the entire process was the idea of writing a scene. And so even though as a creative nonfiction, memoir, spirituality, whatever my genre is, you said you're still telling stories, and because you're your own story, or you're telling a story about winemaking process or an experience. And so the idea of visualizing it and picturing it and telling me when I was with Vineyard Boss Nelson what color his pants were, and those sorts of details. And so I think that helped to enhance the writing and doing it in a way that's balanced and
Yeah.
not Nathaniel Hawthorne or something. So yeah.
Hey.
I mean, it worked for him. So
Oh, that's
but
good.
I'm
And
not
and
him.
one
Yeah,
thing, well, yeah, you're Nelson.
that's right.
Um, One thing I really enjoyed about working with you, because you never know when you enter into an editing writer-editor relationship, is like how sensitive someone's going to be to criticism. And yeah, I just found throughout the editing process, from my perspective at least, you were really able to hold your writing separate from, like, you didn't take things personally, or um I don't know, the ideas seemed external to you, which was really
Right.
helpful as an editor. So, you're not destroying someone if you're asking questions and just being curious about why you're choosing to write something. So,
Right.
um, yeah, I don't know. I guess a question to that is, how do you, was that true for you? Was your writing external to your personhood? Um, and if so, how do you get there so you're not taking things personally in the process of editing?
Right. Yeah. That's really good. That it feels like that connects a little bit to just a general human growing in just sort of how I show up in the world too, in saying and actually learning to not equate feedback with critique. And so there are times when I'm prone, my personality or feels like it's prone to that, where if I ask for feedback, I'm going to get critiqued or something like that. But to realize the actual power in asking for feedback and critique and what that actually can generate. And so, yeah, so somehow there was this, I don't know what the word is, but it's a relationship between growing and my ability to actually seek it out and
Mhm.
invite it in other parts of my life, or offerings at church. So to offer a table group or a retreat, and then to create a feedback form and on my own initiative and to send that out. Like a boss or so, lead team wasn't asking me necessarily to gather that. Of course, I knew they would value it. But for me personally, to actually shoot that out there and to practice that a few times and then to hold my breath and say, what are they going to say? And to not attach that like directly to my personhood. So it helped me, I think, in the writing process to learn that. Plus the trust factor is huge. Like I trust you, yeah, so deeply implicitly in terms of your own belief in my writing and belief in what it could be. And so
Yeah.
I know that you're coming with the best of intention. And so that helps as well.
Yeah.
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 Mutual trust and
Mm-hmm.
curiosity.
Indeed.
Um, Now to switch gears a little bit, I have a
Mm.
question from Maria,
Yeah.
another Patreon. So Maria's asking, what do you write when you don't know what to write?
Yeah. Love that. Uh, a couple of things come to mind. One gets back to a bit of that morning pages idea where I know there could be something in the practice of just writing something. So I might seek out another prompt. And they're all over the internet, of course, like writing prompts. So when you don't know what to write, just write something. And so I have not done that too often. Um, Probably because more often than not, when I don't know what to write, it's because I need to read.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there is research to be done, especially in these kinds of books where I'm weaving a theme or a topic, a thing, a study, a thing I'm studying. So book one was about wine. Book two is going to be about wonder. And then I'm weaving spiritual theology and I'm weaving my own story. So those three basic strands are coming together. And so there's always more knowledge to grow in. My apprenticeship with the winery was only 1 month long. And so I'm
Hmm.
trying to write about a whole process. So and there were times when in the editing process, you would say, this is not quite clear to me. Can you go do some research and get back to me and explain this a little bit more. And so, yeah, so they're more often than not, at least at this stage, this early stage in the journey, it usually means because I don't have anything to say. And so I need to research and figure out what I'm going to say. And then
Okay,
there's
so
moments,
research.
yeah, research,
Sorry?
absolutely. Yeah.
Is it you, so you're reading research, but are you ever reading things that might like not research? Are you ever reading poetry or
Yes.
what else
Yeah, absolutely.
adds to that?
Yeah, and that all doesn't, you can't necessarily draw a direct line, or the reasons why I'm listening to a certain podcast or a playlist or reading poetry or those sorts of things. But yeah, I do try to read other things as well outside of the actual topic. And if that sometimes just helps the juices flowing. There is often when I'm on a run and I'm listening to a lyric or a podcast or something, and I will end the run and I will go to my notepad on my phone and say, either I'll drop in the link to that podcast for later, or an actual idea kind of spins out, and then I'll just gather 100 words that'll prompt me later. And so there are moments where inspiration actually strikes and kind of hits, and I'm learning to catch those
Yep.
and to get them down. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I always love hearing about like movement propelling
Yes.
creativity, and like, for me that's a huge part of like my process. So love
Right.
love hearing
Yeah.
that for you too. And also curious because for me, throughout the years, you've been really instrumental in creating community around writing.
Mm.
Um, and I'm you said shitty first drafts
Yeah, I
once
did.
already, so I'm allowed to say that word here in this
Hmm.
space. But you started the Shitty First Drafts Club. I think it got shut down with COVID, or I can't remember the timeline
Yeah.
exactly, but there was that practice, a writer community there, and then the artist retreats through Artisan. Um, is there a role of a community of writing, or a community of writers for you in
Mm.
your practice, or is that not something that um, is happening regularly?
Whatever there has been, it has been on my initiative thus far. Haven't been sort of invited. I mean, I am, interestingly, brief sidebar, but it's connected. I got invited a few months back to contribute to a collaborative book, to contribute a chapter to that. And so it's going to be called something like Sacred Presence in Creative Practices. And so my former spiritual director, Lori Martin, and a friend of hers named Sarah Lyons are collaborating to put this together. And they've invited, I think, 20 different people to contribute a chapter each. And the book is meant for like spiritual care practitioners, spiritual directors, retreat facilitators, as a bit of a resource book to hand people that they're companioning, in order to expand the possibility for spiritual practice. So I'm like, this is a great opportunity to write a chapter that's going to go in my book, but then also to contribute to this. So I asked this idea, could I do something on the practice of wonder? And they said yes. And so there will be a micro community developing around just that collaborative kind of thing. But so that was one where I was invited into it. But
Mhm.
otherwise, it's been things that have been on my initiative. And I feel like if there's a question beneath that too, I feel like I have enough of a balance between the solitude that I need and actually love, and also then the connection. And so moving into the editing process, or even trying things out through social media and
Mhm.
testing those kind of bits. Patreon is now another platform, email newsletter. So there is these virtual communities, that ends up being a bit of a give and take there too.
Okay.
Mhm.
Enough people you can throw
Right.
things
Yes,
by.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, okay, well now is the time for Lando's question,
Okay, Lando,
finally.
bring it.
Um, and it's a good question. What
Hmm.
is the timeline for the new book?
Hmm.
And will HarperCollins be the publisher?
My first response is, do you know someone over there?
Yeah. Yeah, get a
And
nice
if
in.
so, let's chat. If not, it will likely be self-published again, this time. This is a longer conversation. Lando, you and I have talked about that a little bit too, and I've appreciated your encouragement and your belief in my writing. And yeah, so the timeline for this one, if I could actually, it's might be reasonable to expect that it could be out by Christmas, because I have a
Okay.
sabbatical coming, and my idea is to be writing this book mostly through the months of May and June, where I don't have to do any other work, and into July. And if that works, there's motivation there, because Julia, if she's going to be my editor, it has to happen in the summer months, because once fall hits, second year of med school is going to erase that possibility. So I'm motivated on that front. And so we shall see, but I'm going to do my darndest to see if I can make that happen. And because it's on the topic of wonder, I think like an Advent release for that would be really lovely. So we'll see.
Well, and we got to hear more about what book 2 is about. But I think it'd be great at some point for your Patreons even to discuss a little bit more about like the self-publishing process and the pros and cons that you found having gone through it. I don't know if
Totally.
I'm mindful of the time, and I really want to hear
Right.
about what book 2 is about. So maybe just pocket that one for another
Good idea.
conversation.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
I'm curious about that too.
Yeah.
What is book 2 about?
Book 2.
Wonder.
Yes. Yeah, so there are likely this crew, looking at who's here, have all seen my first kind of 2 excerpts that are already in some of my posts on Patreon. So one is just called, I think, a sneak peek at book 2, or my next book. So if you haven't seen that, you can look at it. There's a little image of a seal, and there's a story that sort of led to the genesis of that idea. And there's a second one that is, the title is something like, "What do Jesus, James, and John have to say about wonder?" And the James and John aren't the ones you're thinking of. And so there's a little bit of a teaser there. I also just posted something just on socials a week or 2 ago, where I look at a Venn diagram of faith and doubt, and wonder being the overlapping space in the middle. So those are some early attempts at what this book will be about. But the working title is The Endangerment of Wonder. And the whole idea is that a conviction, a feeling, a sense that as a society, particular Western kind of culture, we are deficient in wonder, and that there are forces or barriers or things that have caused that, other than just simple development, becoming adults. So that's certainly one of them. Maybe we can't control that, but maybe there are ways that we can. But so there's an endangerment, I think, happening of wonder. So how might we work to recover our sense of wonder? Because I also think there is an appetite for awe, curiosity, awareness, attention, and a desire to recover some of what we've lost. So I think the book will be an exploration of that. And so if I do stick with the negative toned title, The Endangerment of Wonder, I hope that the subtitle then will maybe give it a bit of a lift, or, hint toward a recovering. And but at the same time, that's one of the questions that I'm sitting with is it okay to have a title that tilts towards the negative, like, or something is being lost here? Emotionally, I think it hits, but will enough folks kind of pick it up? So I'm really curious and open to ideas about that. But yeah, so that's the space. I'm inspired by Mary Oliver and her 3-part instructions for living a life: and pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That's what was on my bookmark. That may form a bit of a structure for book 2. But we'll see. So those are the seeds. Yeah.
Oh, I'm very excited about that. Just
Thank you.
living in a world where we have
Mm.
access to so much knowledge to remember to wonder about things. I think, yeah, I'm hungry for that for sure. And we all love Mary Oliver, so
Yeah,
I
kidding.
sure hope I get to edit that book.
Yes, indeed. Me too.
Um, so this is a question from Steve again. Thank you,
Yeah.
Steve. Do you and your family have a favorite practice that helps you reflect on what's happening and to live well in the present moment?
That's great. Yeah, the first one that comes to mind there is actually one that it's a sporadic practice, I admit. But when we can get to it, it's a form of the examen around the dinner table. And so simply asking what's been life-giving, what's been life-draining, or however you form the question. And actually, we started doing this when we were on sabbatical in 2018 with our daughter, who was 2.5 at the time. And those were some tough toddler days. Toddler defiance was at its peak, and it was a little crazy sometimes, really taxing on our energy and
Mhm.
emotional kind of well-being and stamina. And there were some moments where, oof. So, but anyway, we sat there and we would ask, so what, Adri, what was the favorite part of today for you? And is there anything that made you smile today, made you laugh, that was really exciting? She might respond. And there was anything that was hard or kind of a little bit sad kind of for you today. And she would offer something, and it was remarkable because that became the occasion for some confession sometimes, and just to say,
Ooh.
yeah, you know what, Dada, Mama, whoever, we could have responded a little differently when you did that, or when this happened, or whatever that happens. And so you forgive us for that? And, you know, we would exchange forgiveness and move on from that thing. So, but to do that on a somewhat daily basis, whether it's explicit or not, that comes to mind as a family practice that is
Mm.
probably the most at the ready. And to say, what are we celebrating about today, or what made today a little bit more difficult? Um, so that's one of those. And I
Mhm.
think for me, a personal practice as well is simply journaling. And so unburdening what's going on by writing things down. So there's a writing practice as well that's not prompted by, you know, a book particularly or a book project, but something that I try to do on the regular. Receiving spiritual direction is one of those as well. And yeah, so there'll be a couple of them.
Has has having being a dad to Adri, has that impacted how you see the world and how wonder? I'm just curious how being a dad impacts,
Yeah,
I guess, the whole second book, but just wonder. How are you seeing
totally.
things through her eyes?
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, and that actually brings to mind there is another book excerpt on Patreon as well.
Mhm.
And that's Small Wonders #1. It's my kind of my first newsletter, but I told the story of being at Disneyland last May. And there's a little picture of Adri starting to burst into tears on our last night there. And so when we realized, oh, Adri, are you crying? And she's like, it dawned on her that this was over, that we had spent
Mm.
3 days there. And it was such as the definition of bittersweet, because
Mhm.
it was the sweetest thing. And we tried to assure her, like, we will be back, we'll come back sometime. And you know, so it's not over forever. And to work through that. So, but yeah, there is some sense at which this theme is, you can draw lines to in my life as a dad, absolutely. So I'll be trying to mine some of more of those stories, and through that wonder lens,
Mm.
through sort of that dad life.
Dad life.
Yes.
Um, we have a question from Michael.
Yeah.
And Van Gogh had to have a time when he needed to put the paintbrush down to
Mm,
finish a new painting, not putting one more drop of paint on the canvas. So, when do you have a sense that the chapter is fully complete, fully edited,
mm.
with no more word or sentence needing to be tweaked?
Yeah.
Nicely written. That's a good
That's
question.
great, Michael. Thanks. Yeah. Um, when Julia says it's done. There is my mind is obviously it's drawn to that latter part of the editing process for sure. I do want it to go through that process and that refinement. Um, and so, however, there was also another layer where I invited second readers.
Mhm.
So outside, when the editing process was essentially done, kind of thought this is mostly done, and now I want a couple of other sets of eyes. And so I did give it to a couple of other friends who are like really close friends who know me well, who are also literary types in their own right, and gave it to them. And then I worked through those edits, and I did some of that internal wrestle. It's interesting to notice again these two people who might say opposite things or seemingly opposite
Mhm.
things. What do I think? What did Julia think in the midst of that?
Mhm.
What's truly, what am I going to say on this one?
Mhm.
Some of your coaching was super helpful in that too, to say like, whether you agree with it or not, or whatever surfaces for you, it's good intel, it's good information. So to
Yeah.
treat it as information, and then to decide, what am I going to do with that information? Um, but I really valued that process before I put the brush down, metaphorically, to give it to another set of folks and to work and wrestle through that. So once I had done that process, it felt like that was enough. It was like to me, there was this intuitive sense of I have worked um, to a sufficient level to say, this is as good as my writing on this chapter, on this book is going to be at this stage of my journey. And then to
Mhm.
accept that there could be more,
Mhm.
and then to just drop it and be okay with it. So great question. So a bit of convoluted
Thanks.
answer, but that's how I got to it this last time.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember you saying that like this is as good as I'm going to be like right now. This is as good as
Right.
this is going to get. And I thought it's pretty good. So
Right. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think that it's it'll be interesting when you have a couple books out to be able to
Hmm.
look back and even reflect on this question um some more because you could give it your writing to a bunch of different people and get so much feedback. Um and it could never be done. But I think it's almost like a little time capsule of this is
Yeah.
who you were as a writer then. This is what you were thinking then. This is what you were feeling about putting into your book at that point. So no, I think that's just really it'll be interesting to look back and reflect on this question a few
Right.
books down the line
A
too.
few books down the line. That's a wild thought. Yeah.
It is. It's gonna happen.
All right.
So we have maybe time for one more question. I don't know, does anybody I think I got to all the questions in the chat here. If I didn't, do you mind just plopping it in again? I think I got them all. Um, but yeah, I guess, is there anything else that you would want to leave us with? I still have more questions, but
Right.
is
Yeah.
is there anything else you would want to leave us with before we go?
Yeah. I think I don't know. I think mostly these were some of the questions that I really appreciate, and I'm grateful. Yeah, I feel like a gratitude to you for being here, for offering those questions, for listening. Yeah, I had no idea this is an experiment. This all feels like the Patreon journey has been yeah, so much learning, and to show up in this space and in this way, and to, as they say, put yourself out there in these sorts of spaces. Yeah, there's always a bit of a vulnerable kind of edge to it. And, but to learn towards that, I was saying to Julie as well, and I'll just say to you all who are here, I really worked hard to not script my answers. And so I don't have notes. I just had the questions, and I wanted to, that's another skill that I want to grow in, learning to have conversations like this where I can be confident in myself that I'm going to come up with some words. I'm going to say something that is going to be true, and will come from the heart and will be authentic. And so I want to flex that muscle as well in further interview possibilities or podcasts or those sorts of things. And that's a bit of an area where I'm challenging myself. And so, yeah, just wanted to, tear down the fourth wall a bit too, and say, I've not scripted these answers. This is just sort of off the cuff, and to practice that as well.
Boschman Unscripted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's great.
Well, and even just thinking back to a previous question about your community of writers, this is a really interesting. I didn't think of Patreon as a community really,
Right.
um, but it is such a lovely community where people get to like people who know you, maybe people who don't know you, get to ask you these questions, get to maybe grow in some of their practices, and
Mm.
I don't know, it's quite nice. So
Yeah,
thanks for including us all in your process
yeah,
so vulnerably, and yeah, thanks for making
absolutely.
space.
So welcome. Yeah, so thank you again, Julia. Grateful for you. Thank you. You're absolutely the best, and I'm honored to call you both friend and editor. And I'm really, really hoping we can work together again. Thank you all for being present here, and your presence and your support really just mean the world, and they're really enabling this life to happen. So stay tuned for more exciting perks coming your way. Another first that I'm going to try sometime in April. I don't have a date set yet, but is an online writing sprint. So it'll probably be a 2-hour window where I might see if I can get Julia or some other pals to sort of come in and be present as well. And it'll be sort of a combination of video interview, but then also we're going to get down to it and do like 20-minute bursts where we're actually working together in real time. That'll also be recorded for later if people can't join on it. But do a YouTube search sometime for online writing sprint if you don't have a frame of reference for this, but it can be a way to continue to propel your own creative work forward. And so if that is of interest to you, then that'll be available to you as Patreon subscribers. Yeah, these are things I did script. Wanted to make sure I get to them. Oh, other ways to support my work, which are always appreciated as well. Tell your friends about my Patreon. Tell them about my email list. Forward them an email newsletter if you found it helpful. My website as well. On social media, it always helps to like and to comment and to share. That's also fantastic. If you haven't read The Growing Season yet, encourage you, buy a copy, read it, share it with folks. Laura, shout out to you. I think this is the Laura who is here, who have bought some for your small group and are about to read it together. I love that. Love hearing those kinds of stories. If you do read it, and mostly if you enjoy it, but also if you didn't, write a review on Amazon or Goodreads. Those are really helpful in getting it in front of other people. So I think that's it. So we'll do this again. I've kept it purposely vague, occasional live Q&A conversation. So I don't know how frequently, but I'd love to hear back from you. Should I do this two times a year, 3 times a year? I don't know. And so it'd be great to know what you valued and what you took away. So thanks.
Thanks, Nelson. Thank you. And we've got some thanks coming in from the chat too. Thank
Oh,
you to
cool.
you.
Okay. Thanks. I'll check that out. Thanks all. So look for this on the Patreon, the recorded version, in a day or two, whenever I can sort of get that happening. And we'll stay in touch. Thanks so much.